Okay, so we're in Chapter 12 of the U.S. government, and we're covering citizenship. Some of the learning goals are to identify reasons people immigrate to the United States, to explain immigration laws and requirements for naturalization, to explain the rights, responsibilities, and duties of citizens, and to describe ways citizens may participate in government, to describe interest groups and how they affect public policy, and to describe how civil liberties and rights are granted for citizens. As we know, the United States is a nation of immigrants, most of us European descent. People of many different races and nationalities live in the United States, and these citizens have rights and responsibilities. And many people participate in the government, though not all. Through the years, immigrants have come to the United States in great numbers, and we're going to discuss that. So why did people come to the United States? Some it was to gain freedom they did not have in their own home of origin. Some are trying to escape unfair treatment. Many are seeking shelter and opportunities, and others are escaping wars and shortages of food, and we're seeing an increase in that. When did most immigrants come? Well, there has been so far 4 major waves of immigration. The first one began with the colonists who came from Europe, and that was between 1600 and the beginning of the Revolutionary War in 1775. Then there was the second wave of immigrants that came between 1820 and the 1870s, and most of them were trying to escape famine or a lack of food and hard economic times. So that was an issue. And then gold was discovered in California in the mid-1800s. So many people came from across the ocean to get rich. The third wave of immigration came between 1880 and 1920. And again, many of these people were from Europe, and they entered at Ellis Island in New York via boats. And the fourth wave of immigration began in 1965, and this is when U.S. immigration laws changed. And the change made it possible for more people to immigrate to the United States. What laws affect immigration? Well, in 1921, a law was passed to limit the number of people who could come to the United States. So this law set limits for each country. So it was country-specific with its limits. And then in 1965, the Immigration and Nationality Act ended the limits based on nationality. So then your nationality had nothing to do with it. This law set an annual limit of 170,000 people from the Eastern Hemisphere and 120,000 people from the Western Hemisphere. So it was more regional than based on nationality. 1995 rolls along, and the number of immigrants allowed to enter the United States each year was set at 675,000. So the number began to increase as our population increased. And then in 1996 to 97, Congress passed laws dealing with illegal immigration. So that started to become an issue. And the laws intended to block illegal immigrants from entering the United States. Some of the laws, though, also offered help to legal immigrants who had already been in the United States for many years. So they didn't want to tear families apart. Sometimes there's issues of people fleeing their country as a refugee, and I'll discuss that next. So oftentimes immigrants come in and they break the population limit, and that's because sometimes refugees are allowed to come in. And a refugee is a person who travels to a safer place to live. And unfortunately, there's a lot of dangerous countries, regions, and so these refugees have been persecuted or harmed or treated badly over and over again, just abused by their government because of their religion or because of their politics. As an example, the Vietnam War Many Vietnamese and Cambodian refugees came to the United States just to escape the war in their countries. They would wake up and their neighbors would be blown away. They lived in constant fear. So oftentimes more people wish to come to the United States than our limit allows. And many people have relatives in our country, and they have a better chance of being admitted. So also people with incredible talents or certain job skills. So say you're a brain surgeon and you have this one technique of healing a certain kind of aneurysm. People like that are more likely to get into the United States. When you talk about how many immigrants there are, according to the 2000 census, and we have one every 10 years, so I'm referring to an older census, about 30 million foreign-born people lived in the United States. So immigrants make up about 10% of the population. And that 30 million is in comparison to the 281 million total number of residents in the United States. So the United States population in 1900 was around 76 million. And then in 2000, the population climbed all the way up to 281 million, so it more than doubled. And so the last 100 years, it's grown by 205 million people. And what is our population made up of? It's mostly European descent, but then we have 13%, or actually, yeah, 13% African Americans, 12% Hispanics, and then the rest European. So why is a census important? We have a census every 10 years. And so as an example, that census indicated that California is the most populated state and Wyoming the least populated state. The first 10-year census was conducted in 1790. It's written in the Constitution, so we have a census for many purposes. One is to determine the number of House of Representatives for each state. As you recall, there are 435 members. Well, each state is allowed at least one, so you subtract the automatic 50 from the 435, and then we're left with 385 remaining seats. That's divided between the states based on state population. So, of course, California would have the most representatives. The census, however, does not affect the Senate because it's 2 per state no matter what. There are many other causes for the census results. A lot of times businesses use the results for shaping their own decisions. It also helps indicate who our population is so we can make policies that reflect the needs of the people. So information about age, income, and race is also collected. So what does it take to become a U.S. citizen? Well, most citizens are born in the United States. And then a person who is born in the United States or in one of the territories becomes a U.S. citizen when they're born. So then what happens with people who are not born in the United States? In most cases, a child born to foreign parents in the United States is considered a United States citizen. So automatically, if you're born on this soil, no matter where your family's from, you are automatically a U.S. citizen. The U.S. Bureau of Citizenship and Immigration Services is a bureau of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And they determine how many people may enter the country, who may become a citizen, and who must leave. So let's discuss who aliens are. A person who lives in a country but is a citizen in another country is considered an alien. So people who live here, who are from another country, who live in the U.S. for some reason. So they can be visiting, they could be students on an international exchange, or they could have a temporary job in the United States. While aliens are in the United States, they also have to follow certain U.S. laws, and they do get most of the rights we get. They have to register once a year, every January, and because the immigration officials need to know where the aliens are. It sounds so funny to use the term alien. They have to know where the aliens are constantly because of Homeland Security issues, as we know from the Boston bombings. It is a serious concern. So if an alien has some kind of sketchy activities, they can be deported. But if not, you can gain full rights as a citizen. You can vote, you can serve on a jury, and you can hold public office. Those who are deported, they have to leave right away, and they're sent right back to their country of birth. And usually it's because they've committed a serious crime, or there's signs that they're loyal to a certain government that's extremely unfriendly with the United States. So we're going to talk about naturalization, and it's the act of giving full citizenship to a person born in another country. So many aliens end up liking the United States and they want to stay. So they have to do this process. So there are some rules for citizenship. You have to be at least 18 years old. You have to at least lived in the United States for 5 years, usually. That's not always the case. And you have to apply for naturalization. You have to be able to speak, read, and write in English. That's why we have ELA classes. You have to show that they are good, honest people and an examination about U.S. history and government. They have to promise to support our country and not support any other government. And then they have to take this oath. And as you see in this picture, this is a group of people taking an oath. And basically, it's an allegiance to loyalty of our country and our government. And they get the rights of citizens. And children of naturalized U.S. citizens become U.S. citizens. What is political asylum? Well, it's a place where a person is safe from being harmed by his or her country or government. So it's a place of safety. Political asylum may be given to, usually they're given to visitors, athletes, artists, sailors, workers from another government, and it is given to the people because they feel mistreated by their own country. The United States offers protection until it is clear why they wish to leave their native lands. Okay, so we protect the people, and then we wait for a better understanding of why these people are fearing their own country. If their reasons are strong enough, the aliens are allowed to stay. And so then they are allowed to apply for U.S. citizenship. So once you become a citizen, there are definitely some rights and responsibilities. And when I use the word civic, I'm talking about relating to being a citizen. American citizens are equal before the law, and they are given rights by the Constitution. So once you become a citizen, the Constitution and what it provides is applicable to you. And citizens must, in turn, take responsibility for their rights. They must respect and defend the rights of others as well. So the most important thing citizens can do to keep their rights is to vote, encourage others to vote, be informed about public issues, volunteer in civic groups. You can, if you're a student, participate in community organizations. And so I'm going to list some of the 4 major rights in the First Amendment that really apply to citizens. The first one is freedom of religion. It means you can worship as you please and join any church you wish, and you cannot prevent anyone else's religious freedom. And then there's freedom of speech, and you may speak your feelings about the government and not fear punishment. You can criticize the government all you want as long as you're not threatening a politician. So you can also realize in your freedom of speech that you cannot harm others with your speech or prevent others from speaking. Freedom of assembly means that you can gather in groups, you can discuss issues, or peacefully demonstrate. You may not, and here's the responsibility, cause a riot like what happened recently in Seattle. There was a riot, there was property damage, and people were hurt. That's not a freedom. The last is freedom of press. Citizens may publish opinions of issues without fear of punishment. And so the responsibility of that is you can't publish false statements or pictures that would harm an individual or group. So let's briefly go over the duties that citizens have. Under civic duties, they must obey laws, serve on juries, so if you ever get a jury summons, you have to go. And then defend the country. So if you're an 18-year-old male, you have to be sure to sign the appropriate forms because you could get called to duty. There's political duties, so that means you need to vote in elections, stay informed about political issues and what's happening in the government, and also pay taxes because you don't want to mess with the IRS. Then, being a part of civil society means, you work with organized groups and you volunteer, you get involved with your community. You work to protect the environment, or you volunteer in a hospital or an animal shelter. That's just part of being a community member. So volunteering. And then there's something that we hopefully can be is patriotic. Whether we agree or disagree with our politicians is one thing, but the fact that we are given a Bill of Rights, being patriotic means not that you are constantly approving, but that fact that you can disapprove. So you can have a love of your country even if you do not like what your leaders are doing. Let's go over civil liberties. They are the individual freedoms with which the government may not interfere. The government cannot take away certain rights, and that includes freedom of religion, press, speech, assembly, and petition. That's something we went over in the First Amendment. So the freedom of a person to enjoy the rights guaranteed by the Constitution, that is the term civil liberties. The Constitution, for example, protects us from unreasonable searches. So you can't have someone knock on your door, barge in, and go through your stuff because they think you took something. They actually have to go through a process. So police have a protocol. The Constitution is the main protector of our liberties. So knowing your Bill of Rights is very important. For instance, the 14th Amendment said that slaves and other African American people could be citizens. And so it says that the states must give all citizens equal protection. That means no matter what state you're in, you have equal protection. And other amendments were added that gave African Americans the right to vote. In the 1920s, women were given the right to vote, and then 18-year-olds were given the right to vote. And so with these civil liberties comes also the due process. The 14th Amendment also mentions due process of law, which it's a fair method of forcing people to obey the law. And what does that mean? Well, you have a right to your own privacy, And the term is to secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Basically, that means you have a right to privacy with your stuff. People can't unreasonably search through your stuff. So these two amendments, the Fourth Amendment, which has to do with due process, and then the 14th Amendment, also, they both kind of discuss this. And it sets guidelines for arresting people and taking them to court. We're going to go over some major court cases. So over the years, the Supreme Court has made rulings about people's rights, and that's how we define them more and more. So there's three major ones. If a search is not legal, things taken during that search cannot be used in court. So that was the Mapp versus Ohio of 1961. So any evidence found in an illegal search cannot be used against you. Number two, a confession cannot be used if you are tricked or forced in order for them to get it. So, oh man, I wish I had that movie. There's a movie out right now about 5 boys who were accused of rape, and they did not do it. But they were so harassed by the police force, threatened, that they actually confessed to a crime they did not do. So, in 1964, Escobedo versus Illinois, that set down an impressive case where you cannot be threatened. And then last, another major case, people must be told of their constitutional rights. We call that the Miranda, reading the Miranda rights. So that happened when this defendant Miranda was not told his rights to counsel, meaning that before he's questioned by police, he has a right to have a lawyer. Or the right to remain silent. If he's being asked certain questions, he doesn't need to self-incriminate, meaning make himself vulnerable to being considered that he did something wrong. So his rights were violated for the 5th and 6th Amendment, and that's where the Miranda versus Arizona case came along. Okay, we're going to finally go over a very important act. It's the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Basically, it ended discrimination because of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in all public places, employment, and voter registration. Wow. So this idealistic act stated that all people certainly are created equal. Many states at this time were passing laws that were intended to segregate African Americans. And these laws were challenged many times, and it started in 1892, and it was especially concerned with education. So often the Supreme Court ruled the law was constitutional if the facility was separate but equal. So they used this separate but equal clause. And then there were arguments, no, separate is not equal, and it never will be. So in 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka that in public education, separate but equal had no place. So the Supreme Court said having separate schools for African Americans were not equal under the Constitution.